Frank shut. Yeah, Frank lived on this
San Vicente?
on San Vicente in Linwood.
Yeah.
They were.
They're not there anymore, are they?
No, Frank has retired and they've moved out to 29 Palms or someplace like that. Meant to tell you about Louis. Yeah. Louis and I were real close friends all through high school. Yeah. We went, when I used to take my mom back to work on weekends, one weekend Dolores and Lou rode out with us. And I had to be back in time to go to the theater to usher.
This is after you graduated?
This was after we graduated. And Lou was, we passed a theater there and had a particular show that Dolores wanted to see. And Lou said, "I'll take you." And I kind of looked at him and with a puzzled look, and well, we weren't engaged. We were going steady, but we weren't engaged. And so when I got off work that night, I called Dolores to maybe we'd go out and have a hamburger. She wasn't home. So I got that big light globe above my head, and I called Lou's house, and he wasn't home. And sure enough, they'd gone to the show, which, if I'd have been off work, I'd have gone with them. The three of us would have gone.
I take it wasn't the same theater that you were working in?
No, it was not the same theater I was working. I was working in a second rate, where the pictures came through on their second time around. And of course they'd gone to a first-rate show. And certainly no harm or anything really wrong, and I knew it, but I was ticked. I didn't speak to Dolores for a month. Never went out with her or anything for a month. And I didn't speak to Lou for over a year. But I guess in the long run I was the one to suffer for it. I missed his friendship. I'm sorry you moved that so it'd be closer, and I was figuring it wasn't lining with the couch. But Frank was I had a lot of classes and stuff with Frank, and we did a lot of dating. There was a group of about 4 or 5 of us, myself and Lou Gherkins, and Don Clay, and Frank Shutt, and Chuck Chester.
Yeah, I've heard all those names.
Yeah. Yeah, they were all good friends, close. Chuck Chester's dad helped me get a job with the Edison Company after I got out of the service. He was the superintendent of the diesel plant in Vernon for the Edison Company. And he helped me get on with the Edison Company after I got out of service.
Well, let's talk about that. You got out of the service because we have the tape of the service.
Well, after I got out of the service, I could have got my job back with with Thompson Products, but they wanted to pay me the same amount of money, that $125, and of course, as you know, by that time Penny was around, and that was hardly enough to support a family on, and there was really no future in it for me as far as I could see. Those guys, of course, I'd been in the service and I was out working outside all the time, and I did go to work for Western Pipe and Steel in their drafting room, and I could see, a lot of Dolores's family worked there, and so I was able to get a job there.
This is right after the war.
This was right after I got out of the service.
How long were you off before you started?
I went right to work. I went right to work, and I was working in the drawing room, and I could see those guys all bent over, hunched over a drawing board, and thick glasses, and I'd get up and go sharpen my pencil, and then I'd go get a drink, and then I'd go to the restroom, and just was restless. I don't know how long I worked there, but I wasn't there very long. But I was close enough that I came home for lunch, and I came home one noon for lunch, and while Mom was fixing my lunch, I was feeding Penny mashed up string beans, and I'm sitting in front of her and feeding her, and she reached over with her little fingers and flipped that dish of string beans over right in my lap. And the only suit that I had that could wear to work, because you wear a shirt and tie, and it was a suit I got married in, and it was a disaster because I couldn't go back to work because I didn't have anything to wear to work. So I had to call them up and told them that I couldn't come in. But I went to work for the Edison Company then, and at the same time I went to school nights at SC under the GI Bill, and took a few courses there. And I went to work with the Edison Company in construction, sub-construction, as an apprentice. Fortunately, when I came out of the service, I came out probably 3 to 6 months to a year before most of the guys, because I had enough points to do that. And so with the Edison Company, I had some seniority, and going to school, then I could take a test. I had the knowledge that I needed for the test, so I moved up pretty quick. And
Was your war experience?
yeah, I was an electrician. I went to electrical specialist school for the B-29 and served as a electrical mechanic on the B-29. I started out as an apprentice on the putting up steel and running conduit and that type of thing, and then transferred over to wiring for protection and test metering. And then when an opening came in the test department, I bid on that, and here again, because of the seniority and the ability to pass the test, why I moved into the test department. And I was there for a couple of years when they went on strike. And I didn't want to go on strike, but at the same time I was not going to cross a picket line. And my boss...
Art was a union man, wasn't he?
Beg pardon?
Art was a union man.
Oh yeah, Art was definitely a union man.
And is that where that came from?
There may have been some thought there, and basically, Curt, when I joined the Edison Company, you belonged to the Edison family, okay? Over the period of time that I was with them, the union took over, and you no longer belong to the Edison family, you belong to the union. And the company just let it get away from them.
So they tried to fight it.
They tried to fight it, yeah, and that's what the strike was all about. And frankly, I met people 20 years later, crews working in the field, that there was still hard feelings. Now, how would you like to work with those kind of conditions?
Well, I think that's part of the real world. I'm sure that's everywhere.
Well, I wasn't real happy working in construction anyway because of the
Rednecks.
morale of the guys. When we worked out of town, some of those guys were messing around. Gene Harker, one of the guys, and he was a wireman too, and I was working with him. He was going with a gal up there who owned a beauty shop in town, and she told him to give her his wife's address, and he would have one of those winos in town go down and take care of her. Well, he left the next morning. He was out of there. They had to send somebody else up.
This is up.
And with that type of environment and working out of town, of course, when
you're in the valley, weren't you?
in the valley, yeah, that's right, in the
Joaquin.
San Joaquin Valley, up near Delano, Fresno. I was going to say Delano, Tulare, Visalia, Lemon Grove, that type of an area. It was a bad situation. I regret the fact that I worked out of town that period of time. It caused some problems within our family, as you probably know. I missed a lot of the early years of your and Penny's life. I've regretted it, and tried to tell kids that do that type of thing in construction and so forth where they're out of town. It's hard on family life. Working in test, I was in town all the time, and that was a good job. I was sorry that they had the strike. My boss called me and told me if I would come back to work, he'd make me an A test. And I don't know how long that would have lasted, but it takes 10 years. I'd only been in it a couple of years, and it takes 10 years to make an A test man. It's a complicated. I was working with a Latino fellow who had graduated from University of New Mexico in electrical engineering. Nice guy. He was just maybe a year or 18 months short of retirement. And he took all the time he could off on sick leave that he had coming, and then he went back to work. I got a job. One of the members of our ward was a real estate agent, and he got me a job with a group that was constructing the tract houses out in Downey. It was union, but every time the union steward come around, I ducked. And myself and 11 other Mexicans were stripping forms and digging post holes for these supports for the piers, for the supports for the houses. Playing softball with the elders, I broke my foot. And so I was out of work. And
That's what you were doing at the time.
That's what I was doing at the time. After the strike, I had applied for a position with IBM. One of the fellows that I'd worked with there in test had applied and got a job with IBM.
I remember at that time we used to go get the rock salt.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, I figured, all the guys were coming back from the service and buying homes, and everybody was putting in water softeners. And so I attempted and did established a route where I could deliver salt to the houses, and in some cases change and do the work, add the salt and come back and then drain it, take care of the situation for them.
You did that during the strike?
I started doing that during the strike, and then I broke my foot, and of course I couldn't handle it with a broken foot. When after the strike, I couldn't go back to work until I got the doctor's approval, and I went to. Meanwhile, I'd been hired by IBM, but with that broken foot, I couldn't go to work with them, and I wanted to give Edison notice, and so I had to get clearance from the IBM doctor and from the Edison doctor. After I got clearance from the Edison doctor because the strike had been settled, and I went back to work, and then I went down and got clearance from the IBM doctor, and then gave Edison a notice. After I got notice, then hired on by IBM, they sent me back to Endicott, New York, and I was back there for going to school for 5 months. I came back and worked as a customer engineer repairing IBM equipment for about 2 years.
Time clock?
No, data processing equipment. Key punches, printers, sorters, collators, the key punch machines that were verifiers they called them, where a second girl, they went over the key punch cards with a verifier machine to make sure that the cards were punched correctly. And when a job came open on time clock sales, I took the test for that and passed it. Got an interview, and then went into time clock sales. And I was there for 2 years when they sold the division, time clock division, to can't remember the name of the other company now that has Simplex, that has clocks in schools. And
well, the old school kind of clocks that say IBM.
Yeah, they still have IBM clocks out, but they're pretty old schools by now. Because I worked for, well, that was in the 50s. And then when they sold the division, I could have gone back to customer engineering. While I liked the job, I never felt the job liked me, and so I didn't want to go back. And I didn't want to go to work for the company that I'd been knocking heads with all that time. So I.
What kinds of things about the job didn't you like, or the job didn't like you?
Well, most of the guys that were in that work were college engineers, were college graduates. Somehow, I didn't fit. I just didn't feel like I fit. Most of them were older than I was. And while I was comfortable in sales, I wasn't too comfortable in the repair. After, when that happened, you know, you had been wearing hearing aids, and I had gone to Glands. You remember the Glands? And each time I'd pick up batteries, I'd ask them if there was anything new or anything that would be helpful to you. And she said at the time, if you're so interested, why don't you get into the business? Well, I was doing well with IBM and thought that that's where I wanted to stay. Well, after they sold the division, then I thought, this is a good chance to get into business for myself. I had a little savings, and I had severance pay, and of course Mom was working. So I went to work for Glands. I worked with Glands for, I think I worked with him for about 6 months. And in the meanwhile, I was going to school, a night school at East LA Junior College, and taking audiology. And so when the Pasadena office opened up, then I took the franchise for Mako in Pasadena, which you would understand was a retirement center and be a good field for that. But there was a lot of competition. Beltone was there, Zenith was there. Gosh, who else? Well, there were 3 or 4 offices in town. We were there for about 5 years. And the House Brothers, do you know of the House Brothers? The House Brothers had a clinic in Los Angeles, and still do.
Oh, the audiologist, the medical doctor.
Yeah.
Dr. House and Dr. Goodman.
Yeah. And they were, in fact, you went there a couple of times for tests. Mm-hmm. And they were doing surgery to correct conductive losses. Mm-hmm. And I figured, why put hearing aids on somebody when they can get surgery? And I did recommend a lot of people, and Helen McEldowney for one, to the doctors for that purpose. So that's about the time I decided to get out of the business. When we first went in to business up there, I don't know if you remember or not, we sold the house.
Yeah, we sold it.
Sold it and had to buy it back again. Cost $1,000 to get the house back. We had looked and thought there was a lot of houses up available in that area. And there was one that we liked real well in Sierra Madre, which is a very nice area. And we went on a camping trip up to, remember Dark Canyon? That time we went up to Dark Canyon, and where the fishing was so good until those kids come in from Westwood and ruined it. And while we were up there that weekend, somebody bought the house. We would have had to do some remodeling on it and probably had to make a bedroom out in the garage or something like that, because it was just 2 bedrooms and we really needed 3. It was a nice house, but it was just 2 bedrooms. A lot of houses for sale up there, but a lot of them were in Altadena, and that's a colored area. So we had to take our house back. And you may remember when I was going up there that Penny was working at May Company for Christmas, and I would take her to work, and then on the Santa Ana Freeway, and then go out the Pasadena Freeway to the office. And we were tooling down the Santa Ana Freeway when the VW went put, and out of gas. And I reached down to turn onto the reserve tank, and somebody had the car out the night before and turned it onto the reserve tank. And I was lucky. There was a guy behind me in a VW van, and he could see what had happened. And he come up behind me and pushed me over to the side of the freeway. And that was in rush hour traffic. Pushed me over to the side of the freeway right where the Atlantic Boulevard on-ramp came on. And I walked up the on-ramp, and there was a gas station. Got a gallon of gas, and I took the gas can back the night on my way home. That's when I put the mercury switch on the end of that reserve tank, reserve switch, so that when we turned it over, we turned a green light on up on the dash, so I knew that we were out of gas, and that never happened again. But was in Pasadena for about 5 years. Had the office there, and then.
How did the switch come about from that business to farmers?
Larry and I was working on the chapel. And Larry remembers it as being remember when the ward built the apartments? And maybe it was, but I thought it was the chapel.
I think it would have been the apartments.
Beg pardon? Beg pardon?
That sounds right.
But anyway, one of the two, and I was complaining about all the hours I was putting in, and Larry said, hey, if you put those hours in the insurance business, I think you'd do better. Well, I applied for temporary and put the office up for sale. And I worked as temporary agent. I worked nights and Saturdays and all this time mostly on the telephone, establishing a business. And Fred, and I can't think of his last name now. It was a district manager. Huh?
Fred McMurray.
Fred Murray. Fred Murray, you're right. Fred Murray said, you've either got to make up your mind to go full-time or I have to drop you. Well, about that time, Mrs. Doan, who was working with me, had met a man, and they got married and decided they'd like to buy the business. And they did. And so I went full-time with farmers. And they let me stay there in the office with Larry and Bob and can't think of the other agent's name now. Les Storr passed away. So I didn't have to go into the district office, and I got my training through Larry, which was good. He was good at it. boy, not too long after I was with Farmers, Mrs. Doan's daughter called up and asked me if I wouldn't buy the business back. The guy she'd married turned out to be a wino, or an alcoholic, and was drunk all the time, and of course she couldn't handle the business by herself, and I felt real bad because she'd used her savings to buy the business, and of course I'd used that money to get into the insurance business, so I didn't have the money to buy it back from her, and I didn't want it back. I felt bad about that, but nothing I could do about it. But then I was into the insurance business for...
What happened to Mrs. Doan, you know?
I don't know, Curt. She has no doubt passed away by now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But I really don't know what happened. Somebody else took over the office. I'm sure they didn't buy it from her. But somebody else took over the office. Last time I was up there, do you remember how that was? It was the alley ran up right next door, and the parking
That was insurance agent.
was next door. But the building had been demolished, and
I thought it had, as I recall.
yeah, made into a parking lot. But
That's not a good word anymore.
well, I don't know. It's been a long time since I've been up there, although we did go to the parade one time with Ruth and Paul. We went to the parade with Ruth and Paul and their family. And, of course, went by there. First time I ever went to that Rose Parade, it was down, wasn't on Colorado Boulevard, it was down California Avenue, there by Caltech. And we set up on the wall. I took Dolores and Beth and Bob and Grandma and Grandpa. Maybe it was just Grandma and Grandpa and Dolores and I, because I'm sure we couldn't get that whole family in that car. We set up on the wall there and had a nice view of the parade, and then went home, and Grandma had dinner for us, and I went out to start the car, and it wouldn't start. It was out of gas. Yeah, it was out of gas. We'd come all the way home and park the car in the vacant lot next door, and that was the end of it. Couldn't start it again. They were nice people, Curt. When I'd go with her, Grandma'd make bread, and she'd send a loaf of hot bread home with me, and her dad was always good to me.
You know, I remember when I was young, I remember being scared of Grandma because, you know, she was on the wrong side of her, but she was, and I talked to Tim about it too, you know, and he said, oh yeah, I know what you mean. But there was never, ever any doubt in our minds that she loved us.
Oh yeah, and her,
no question about that.
She was straightforward, and she would never do anything to hurt you. She would never, and even if she scolded you, it was
It was gone as quickly as it
Yep,
was there.
yep. She was, she was very straightforward. She wasn't tactful.
Yeah.
I think that's what I'm trying to say. She spoke her mind, and she didn't care who heard it. And that's probably where, and Mom was the same way.
Yeah, Tim and I often talk about how our kids don't have an extended family.
Yeah.
Tim's family did while they were in California, but they didn't get together like we did.
Yeah.
When I was young, we got together at birthdays, and then we got together at Memorial Day, we got together at Thanksgiving, and we drew names, and we got together, all the time.
Yeah.
And those days are forever gone, the extended family. And then when I was real young, it was really an extended family.
Because it was my mom too, and
well, on both sides of the family.
Yeah.
I can remember gatherings with the Robinsons and the Wilcoxes. I didn't
Yeah.
know who they were.
Yeah.
I remember going over to their houses across the street and down the street on
Yeah.
Plaska. And I remember Aunt Bernice and Aunt Violet and
Aunt May.
and Corinne and
Yeah.
And then that kind of went away a little bit.
Yeah.
And now we don't really have anything because the families, first of all, the families aren't as big, and secondly, we're scattered.
Yeah.
Southern California, Northern California, Utah, Alaska.
Yeah.
The kids, I feel bad because the kids they don't know what it's like to have cousins.
Yeah, the cousins are distant cousins.
Right.
In realistically distant cousins because they don't live close together, and Heather wants to go down and see Desiree and Steve. And Heather wrote us a really nice letter, email one time, about how she remembered the Christmases that you guys used to go down and all the fun they had on those trips down to Southern California, and the enjoyment that they had at that time.
She got a little bit of it, but I don't think many of the other kids even remember it.
Cliff might, but even Cliff and Derek and Dorian were just little guys. And of course, Andy probably didn't get in on it at all, and certainly Marnie wouldn't have. I think maybe in some of the pictures that you roll, you'll see Brian and Andy as babies, but I'm sure that you probably will not see I'm sure you wouldn't see Marnie.
Yeah, and they don't have that extended family.
No.
They really don't. They don't. They only have their own family, which is, some people don't even have that.
Well, you see, Cliff and Derek and Dorian remember Stevie.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the others would.
Yeah. But that's the way it is. Tim and I have talked about it many times. Tim was fairly young at the time, but he still remembers it.
Yeah.
And he remembers, spending time with Grandma. And like I said, she was gruff. Like you said, she didn't have a lot of tact, and yet she.
And yet it wasn't a mean type thing with her.
Yeah, she loved her family. Her family was the center of her life.
And Tim came and stayed with them while she was living up here.
Yeah.
He stayed with her,
and
with them.
That's a lot of where he's coming from too.
Yeah.
And Dennis as well. Dennis has the same thought. We've talked about it lots of times. We talked about it every time we get together. In fact, at least not Tim and I so much anymore, but when we first got together, and then every time we see his brother, which isn't all that often, but it's at least once a year. She liked being around her family, and we were always welcome.
Yeah.
It was just, you just walked in and there she was. She gave you a big hug.
It was really.
I remember Grandma C was the same way.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The Christmases Christmases, she always took you. She'd never take both of you at once, but she'd take you and Penny one at a time down into town to see the store windows and things down in town.
Yeah,
Of course, you don't have that anymore.
Every year, probably in August, you know, she'd take us one time and buy us outfits for school.
Yeah.
I can remember going into J.C. Penney's and Weinman's, and they're on, Pacific Boulevard.
Pacific Boulevard, right in Huntington Park.
Before the malls came in.
Yeah.
And then the highlight of the thing was, you know, going to the drugstore and having a hamburger and a cherry coke, fountain cherry coke.
Mom liked cherry coke a lot.
I know she did. I had more than one with her. Usually on those kind of occasions. Take the streetcar and the bus.
Yeah. Well, where do you want to go from here?
Well, I don't know. You're talking about the business and working with Larry. And he's been a good friend.
He's been I still hear from him 10-page letters about every 2 weeks. In fact, I thought I'd have one in the mail today. Art, of course, the married time originally we lived in Huntington Park. And then after the war, we lived in an apartment there above, behind Brookhouser's. And she wanted the apartment for her daughter when she was divorced. She wanted the apartment, so we were looking around for a place to rent, and we had an opportunity to buy a house in Southgate on the GI Bill. It cost $600 down to move in, and Grandma put that up for us. And we moved in there in Southgate. It was a nice little house.
Yeah, I remember it well.
And no doubt you remember, and probably remember some of the kids that lived around there, the Palm kids and
Chestnuts next door.
Palmers
That lady with she had polio and had a grandson next door.
yeah.
I don't remember the name. She lived with another. I don't remember the name, but they were right next door. And people behind us raised rabbits.
Yeah.
Sometimes we'd have rabbits.
Yeah, I remember having rabbits
usually on Sunday afternoon dinner.
Yeah, and bureaus. Well, I don't know whether you knew the bureaus. Probably, you probably wouldn't remember the bureaus. I don't remember the little girl that lived down and across the street. It was about
little old house.
Penny's age in that little old house. The Matthews lived across the street, and he be the young kids, and I had him in priesthood, and he was later a bishop of the ward. We moved from there on San Carlos.
I didn't know that.
Well, they were older than you were, Curt. They were teenagers, and you were still a little guy. We then moved out to Santa Fe Springs. That was a nice time of our life. We were a young family, and with young families, so they were raising their kids, and we were raising ours, and it was a fun time in Santa Fe Springs for us. Then when after you went on a mission, Bass's first, when we started moving wanted to move up to Pasadena, both the Basses and the Creightons wanted to make sure we weren't going to sell it to Mexicans. And what happened when they moved out? Both of them sold to Mexicans, which was inevitable because it was becoming a Latino area there. So after you went on your mission, then, and we sold the house and went into, Mom wanted to go into a mobile park. I didn't want to do that, and I tried to tell her that the equity in our home, there wasn't any equity in a mobile home. And the equity in our home would be part of our retirement, or if anything ever happened to me, she would have the equity in the home. Actually, we were very fortunate in the fact that where we bought our mobile home, the location was a good part of the selling point. It was right there between two freeways, in a fairly nice area as far as mobile homes are concerned. They never put a mobile home in the middle of a good residential area. I mean, that's they couldn't do that. But as far as a location for a mobile home, and of course we kept the mobile up. We had put a permanent roof on it. We had put siding on it, and we had put an air conditioner in it.